Let Century Management Solutions get you to your next medical appointment. They specialize in non-emergency medical transportation, connecting patients to care, safety, reliability, and on time. Their advanced technology platform seamlessly coordinates patients, healthcare providers, insurers, and transportation partners all in one powerful network. With over 200 trusted transportation providers, they deliver scalable solutions backed by real-time tracking and complete transparency. Go to SENTRYMS.com.
This is the Stone Zone with Roger Stone.
People love him and respect him. Roger Stone.
Now, get in the zone. It's the Stone Zone. Here's Roger Stone.
Welcome to the Stone Zone. And she's out of there. Attorney General Pam Bondi is departing from her role in the Trump administration, terminated today by President Donald Trump. Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche will serve as acting Attorney General as the transition moves forward. Now, there was some speculation, I believe it was in the New York Times, that former New York Congressman and current EPA Director Lee Zeldin, who is an attorney, would be appointed Attorney General. I like Lee Zeldin, although I'm not aware that he ever actually practiced law. And frankly, I think he's doing a great job right where he is. Also, quite candidly, I'm not certain that any Republican could be confirmed to the Attorney General's position given the current makeup of the U.S. Senate. There's 50 votes for the Save America Act, but the majority leader, John Thune, refuses to call the question, citing a arcane Senate rule regarding the filibuster. That means that 60 senators must favor a vote on any piece of legislation or any nomination. That means, in my view, that Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche will continue to serve as acting Attorney General for the time being. The president praised Bondi's tenure, calling her a great American patriot, and highlighted her role in what he described as a sweeping crackdown on crime nationwide. It is true that under Bondi's stewardship, violent crime, including murder, has dropped to historic lows during the time that she was the head of the DOJ. Bondi is expected to move to a private sector position, with details evidently soon to be announced. In a statement, the new interim Attorney General, Todd Blanche, thanked both Pam Bondi and President Trump, pledging continuity in the department's priorities. He emphasized strong support for law enforcement and reaffirmed a commitment to public safety, signaling that the administration's tough-on-crime agenda will remain firmly in place. Sources tell me that Bondi met with the president prior to Wednesday night's White House address and has since returned to her home in Florida. This development becomes among broader changes in the administration. Earlier this year, you may remember, former Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem was reassigned, with Oklahoma Senator Markwayne Mullin stepping into that role. Now, Bondi was removed, I think, because of the president's frustration over the lack of accountability and justice regarding the Russian collusion hoax. The irony, of course, is that according to multiple current Trump administration officials with access to both Bondi and the president, Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche, who was just named acting Attorney General, has actually been the main roadblock holding up prosecutions of former Biden and Obama officials, state-level politicians, and Antifa terrorists. Very specifically, Todd Blanche, the now acting Attorney General, personally shut down the Department of Justice's Weaponization Task Force and is responsible for sidelining Ed Martin, the veteran attorney who had been appointed to that position. Blanche sees himself as a quote-unquote principled conservative, which is false because actually he's a liberal Democrat, and believes that investigating the abuse of power by either Robert Mueller or by Jack Smith is in itself abuse of power. I would point out to the acting attorney general that this is not about retaliation and revenge. This is about justice and accountability. He's privately told his staff that he would not stoop to that level. Under Todd Blanche, the failures of the Department of Justice to investigate the former officials who orchestrated the greatest dirty trick in the history of American politics and the greatest single abuse of power in the history of the country, the Russian collusion hoax, is being unfairly blamed on Pam Bondi. Now, Todd Blanche has done a couple things I agree with. He has been willing to fire U.S. attorneys who were incorrectly and inappropriately appointed to that position by a bank of federal judges. See, this is how this works. There's a Senate tradition that when a U.S. attorney for any given state or jurisdiction is appointed, it requires the acquiescence of both U.S. senators from that state, regardless of party. So when Joe Biden was president, states like Florida that have 2 Republican senators both approved the Biden nominees to that position. That was true broadly across the board. In other words, Republican U.S. senators recognized that Joe Biden had been elected president, and they allowed him to have his appointees. Not under Donald Trump. Under Donald Trump, Democrats have stonewalled virtually every U.S. attorney appointed by the president simply by refusing to sign what they call a blue slip. I don't know if there's physically actually a blue slip or whether that is a reference to this tradition. This isn't a law. This isn't even a Senate rule. This is a tradition, one that the Republicans in the Senate refuse to violate. So Todd Blanche, on at least 2 occasions, when federal judges moved to fill a U.S. attorney's position that had been vacated because of the Senate's refusal to confirm the president's appointee, for example, Alina Habba in the state of New Jersey, they have moved to fill that with one of their own, somebody favorable to the judges. Todd Blanche has had the courage to fire those people, recreating the vacancy. Under the Vacancies Act, that should allow the president to appoint a new acting U.S. attorney who by law can serve for 120 days. The controversial decision in New Jersey to fire Alina Habba, the controversial decision in the Eastern District of Virginia to fire Lindsey Halligan are both legally and judicially incorrect, and I believe both will be overturned. But in the meantime, Donald Trump doesn't even get to have his own U.S. attorneys, his own federal prosecutors. Spotlight is now on Todd Blanche. The question is very simple. Will those in the Biden and Obama administrations who are guilty of seditious conspiracy to remove Donald Trump based on totally fraudulent evidence and the chain of events that began in July of 2016 morphed into the fake Russian collusion hoax in which the probable cause for the FISA court approving the spying on Donald Trump's campaign and for the appointment of Robert Mueller was non-existent. That, of course, turned into the 3-year Russian collusion hoax in which Robert Mueller came up completely and totally empty-handed in terms of actual Russian interference in our elections, but still attempted to destroy the lives and the administration of President Donald Trump, General Michael Flynn, and, well, me. So the real question is, will we have accountability and justice under acting Attorney General Todd Blanche? The jury is out. In the meantime, however, there are other claims, notably by the independent journalist Laura Loomer, who insisted this morning that the president would soon fire or there would be a resignation from the director of national intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard. This story is completely and totally false. It's a complete fugazi, and Loomer, as she often is wrong. Now, Laura Loomer and I used to be close friends. She was a strong supporter of justice in my case. She realized that I had been framed by a vengeful Justice Department and really was prosecuted not because I did anything wrong, but because I simply refused to give false testimony against President Donald Trump. But somehow along the way here, Laura Loomer has gone off the rails. Her maniacal hatred for Tulsi Gabbard is somewhat puzzling. It was Tulsi Gabbard who, in her position as the Director of National Intelligence, declassified all of the documents that prove that there was a seditious conspiracy involving Obama, Biden, CIA Director John Brennan, FBI Director James Comey, Acting Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, National Security Advisor Susan Rice, the former Director of National Intelligence General James Clapper, and others to frame Donald Trump for non-exclusive, non-declassified, for totally fraudulent evidence. What's surprising here, of course, is that the current CIA director, John Radcliffe, served in the first Trump administration as the Director of National Intelligence and could have declassified all of these documents prior to the 2024 election, prior to the 2020 election, I should say, and did not do so. Tulsi Gabbard has had the courage to do that. Tulsi Gabbard is also a decorated combat veteran of the war in Iraq, served her country with honor. She remains a lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army Reserve, and it is presupposed, although she never talked out of school, that she may not have taken as hard a line against the war in Iran as others. Now, I think that within any presidential administration, diversity of opinion is actually valuable. Tulsi Gabbard's job was to get the very best intelligence she could and give it to the President of the United States. She did. The President decided that an attack on Iran was appropriate, and I agree. Tulsi Gabbard never criticized or disagreed with the Commander-in-Chief. She supported that decision, and their internal conversations are covered by executive privilege. But the neocons have been manic in their desire to destroy Tulsi Gabbard for reasons that I frankly don't understand. Again, if you see this later on today and you see these continuing claims on social media that Tulsi Gabbard is about to be fired or is planning to resign, those claims are categorically false. Trust me on this. I have sources at the very, very, very top. It also means you have to take anything that the investigative independent journalist Laura Loomer says with a grain of salt. You see, she is a war hawk, and she is a full-throated supporter of broadening the war in Iran, which I think is politically very dangerous and contrary to the policies of President Trump. See, what Trump has done in Iran is quite different than the neocon strategy of endless foreign war. No boots on the ground, not tens or 20 or 30,000 American casualties, and not billions in new defense contracts for companies like Halliburton and General Dynamics. Now, what Trump is engaged in, and which I completely support, based on everything I know, is a very limited, focused, but incredibly lethal use of American power to prevent the Iranian regime from having a nuclear bomb. We know from the claims at the negotiation table, plus our own intelligence, that the Iranians had enough enriched uranium to build at least 7 and perhaps as many as 11 nuclear bombs. So Tulsi Gabbard going nowhere other than up and remaining in this crucial job. You heard it here first on the Stone Zone. We'll be right back.
This is the Stone Zone with Roger Stone.
He likes politics and he's a professional at the highest level. Roger Stone. Where's Roger?
This is the Stone Zone. Now, get in the zone. It's the Stone Zone.
A man who's gone through hell, but he's kept going, and he's smart, and he's strong, and people love him. Not everybody, but people love him and respect him. Roger Stone. Where's Roger Stone?
Here's Roger Stone.
Welcome back into the Stone Zone. President Donald Trump delivered a strong and confident primetime address last night, outlining major progress in the fight against Iran's regime and offering reassurance to Americans concerning rising gas prices. In his 19-minute address, which is extraordinarily short for this president, the president highlighted decisive U.S. and allied military successes, stating that the Iran's naval and air capabilities had been effectively dismantled. He emphasized that key leaders within the regime have been neutralized, signaling what he described as a turning point in the conflict. President Trump projected confidence that the war could come to a close within 2 to 3 weeks, underscoring a clear strategy to restore stability in the region. He also pointed to signs that Iran's leadership is seeking a ceasefire, which he framed as evidence that sustained pressure is working. On the economic front, the president addressed concerns about energy prices, explaining that reopening the Strait of Hormuz, a critical global oil route, will help bring relief to American consumers. He predicted gas prices will rapidly come back down, along with a rebound in the stock markets. Supporters say the address reflected both strong leadership and a commitment to both national security and economic stability. By confronting threats abroad while keeping an eye on costs at home, the president reinforced his America First approach. The administration maintains that peace through strengths remains the guiding principle of our foreign policy and is delivering results overseas while protecting American families from economic strain. Now is not the time to be a panicking. I trust the president's judgment in these matters, and I think he put it very well last night. In the meantime, the FBI is investigating a Chinese cyber attack, which they claim is a major cyber incident, which is being investigated as such. The breach involved a sensitive FBI system containing law enforcement data, including surveillance-related information such as phone metadata tied to ongoing investigations. I operate on the simple premise that anything I say on the phone or in text or in email will sometimes be available to the entire world. Keep that in mind and guide yourself responsibly. I'm Roger Stone. We'll be right back in the zone.
This is the Stone Zone with Roger Stone.
Roger Stone, who's a one of the smartest political minds. Roger Stone was persecuted. People forget he's actually a brilliant political analyst.
Now, get in the zone. It's the Stone Zone. Here's Roger Stone.
And we're back in the Stone Zone. Here's some good news. A Colorado appeals court has overturned the 9-year prison sentence handed down to former Mesa County, Colorado clerk Tina Peters, an election integrity activist convicted in connection with election-related misconduct during the 2020 presidential race. In a significant ruling, the 3-judge panel found that the original sentencing judge improperly considered Peters' political beliefs, specifically her claims of election fraud, when determining her punishment. The court emphasized that while her actions may have violated the law, in actuality they did not, but her views themselves are protected under the First Amendment and should not have influenced the length of her sentence. The judges concluded it was apparent that the unusually harsh sentence was driven, at least in part, by a desire to deter her from continuing to express those views, creating a chilling effect on her First Amendment rights. The appeals court has now ordered a resentencing, explicitly directing the lower court to exclude any consideration of Peters' speech or political opinions. Let's be absolutely clear. I don't even think Tina Peters violated the law. What she did was copy evidence of election fraud and keep it. And that is why they are maniacal about destroying her. She is 70 years old. She's now suffering from cancer. She has been viciously physically attacked in prison. She is given a thin blanket. Her clothing is not warm enough. She's literally freezing. It's very clear that their intention is for her to die in prison, to try to create a chilling effect on anyone who questions whether our elections are on the up and up. Now, if you really think that 81 million people voted for Joe Biden, a guy who basically had to campaign from his basement and who literally kept falling down and didn't know what day of the week it is, in truth, a veritable vegetable in diapers who spent most of his presidency heavily sedated, well, I have a bridge in Brooklyn I'd like to sell you. If you think Joe Biden got, on average, 20% more of the vote in overwhelmingly African-American precincts in the urban centers of America, well, then you have no sense of realism. Even Colorado's Democrat Governor Jared Polis acknowledged that the sentence was an outlier, expressing concerns about fairness and consistency in the justice system. It's time for Tina Peters to be a free woman. There's two ways to do this. The new acting Attorney General, Todd Blanche, could declare Tina Peters to be a witness in a federal prosecution regarding election integrity and could send federal marshals into Colorado to bring her to Washington. If the governor wants to have a firefight between the state police and federal marshals, he should read the Supremacy Clause of the United States Constitution. Unfortunately, the Justice Department has not used that tactic to free a woman who is very clearly on the cusp of death and who urgently needs medical care. It's time for Tina Peters to be a free woman. The fact that she was thrown in prison for actually having the courage to investigate and expose election fraud is a stain on our country. I say let her be free and lock up the interests who committed the immense election fraud itself in 2020. Meanwhile, Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, himself sweating whether he will face a primary in New York State, potentially from Bronx Congresswoman AOC, a contest that he would lose, or could be dumped by his fellow Senate Democrats who correctly see him as a dinosaur, has now been forced to acknowledge that the Senate Democrats were responsible for delaying funding for the Department of Homeland Security while ultimately failing to secure any of their key demands. In an interview with CNN's Wolf Blitzer, I've been on his show. I can tell you this guy has the worst breath of anybody you've ever met. Defended the delay, claiming that Democrats were pushing to reform immigration and customs enforcement and the Customs and Border Protection, which he labeled lawless. It's been a long time since Chuck's been in a courtroom, but I think he's wrong about the law. The final deal passed the Senate includes no such reforms, leaving funding for both agencies completely unchanged. Pressed by Blitzer, who poses as a journalist, but is in fact a propagandist, on whether Democrats had simply engaged in political posturing, Schumer pushed back, but also conceded that existing funding for ICE and the Border Patrol remains in place from prior legislation. Critics argue the delay accomplished little beyond disrupting government operations. The standoff contributed to a partial shutdown, impacting the DHS components, including airport security. Those operations under TSA continued because President Trump very shrewdly sent in ICE agents to back up those TSA agents who remained on the job despite the fact that they weren't getting paychecks. You may have missed this, but the richest man in the world, Elon Musk, said that he would happily voluntarily pay the salaries of all those TSA agents until this matter was resolved. That became unnecessary as the Democrats ultimately folded. Republicans have pointed to this episode as further evidence of the misplaced priorities of the Democrats, arguing the Democrats chose to hold up essential funding in an attempt to weaken immigration enforcement, only to walk away without any results. The legislation now heads back to the House after previously being rejected. If approved, it will be sent to the president's desk. So the outcome underscores a clear message: the efforts to defund or overhaul ICE and the Border Patrol remain out of step with the need for strong, consistent immigration enforcement and public safety across the country. Let me point out that virtually every respected public poll shows that 80+% of the American people support the deportation of dangerous illegal immigrants in this country. The president remains on track for that important engagement. Meanwhile, federal authorities are on a heightened alert after ISIS issued a chilling global call for attacks targeting churches and synagogues during the Easter and Passover holidays. According to intelligence reports, the terror group used its propaganda network to encourage followers to carry out arson and violence across the United States, Europe, and the Middle East. The message reportedly frames such attacks as acts of religious duty, raising concerns about so-called lone wolf extremists who may be inspired by this online chatter. Security experts warn that the timing is particularly dangerous as Easter and Passover bring large gatherings at places of worship, potentially increasing vulnerability. Analysts say that ISIS continues to rely on decentralized, internet-based radicalization, making these threats much harder for U.S. officials to detect and prevent. The warnings come amid broader instability in the Middle East and the Persian Gulf, including tensions surrounding Jerusalem and ongoing conflict, of course, involving Iran. At the same time, reports indicate that a major detention camp in Syria, once holding ISIS-linked individuals, has been largely emptied following widespread escapes, further heightening global security concerns. The threat underscores the urgent need for vigilance at home and a firm stance against terrorism abroad. Weak border policies and lax enforcement are only increasing the risk of dangerous individuals entering Western countries. Law enforcement agencies are urging communities to remain alert while increasing security around these important religious holidays. As Americans gather to celebrate sacred holidays, they should consider exercising their Second Amendment rights. Don't be a sitting duck for these maniacs. Protect yourself and your community as the Founding Fathers intended if you are required to do so. Meanwhile, President Donald Trump is calling out the major insurance companies, including State Farm, urging them to get their act together after meeting with California officials and hearing firsthand from victims of the state's devastating 2025 wildfires. The fires, including the Palisades and Eaton blazes outside of Los Angeles, destroyed more than 12,000 structures and claimed dozens of lives, leaving thousands of families struggling to rebuild. In a statement, President Trump criticized insurers for collecting years of premium payments only to fall short when policyholders needed to help the most. The president has directed his extremely able EPA Administrator Lee Zeldin to compile a list of insurance companies that acted responsibly, as well as those that failed to deliver for disaster victims. Right here in my home state of Florida, we've seen a similar problem where Governor Ron DeSantis, a Republican, and the overwhelmingly Republican majorities in the House and the Senate passed a law that says if your home is destroyed in a hurricane and the offer made to you by your insurance company is unfair, you have no right to sue them. Now, I'm not a big supporter of the trial bar, but I think that that's entirely unfair. And yet another example of the abuses by these major insurance companies and the legislators who regulate them. State and local officials in California have already launched investigations into State Farm's handling of wildlife claims, citing complaints of delays, underpayment, and poor communications. Critics say these practices have slowed recovery efforts and added unnecessary hardship for families trying to rebuild. Despite those concerns, State Farm maintains it has processed more than 1,500 claims and paid out billions of dollars, with total payouts expected to climb even higher. For many, the situation highlights the broader issue of large corporations failing to meet their obligations to everyday Americans in times of crisis. Supporters of the president say his push for accountability sends a clear message that Americans who play by the rules and pay their premiums must be able to count on their insurance company in times of distress. When disaster strikes, no bureaucratic delays or corporate excuses should be allowed. Vice President JD Vance, who President Trump has named as the country's anti-fraud czar, is touting a major victory in the Trump administration's efforts, announcing the arrest of multiple suspects accused of stealing more than $50 million from American healthcare and hospice services. Federal law enforcement executed a coordinated series of arrests and search warrants across Los Angeles yesterday as part of Operation Never Say Die, targeting 11 defendants allegedly involved in large-scale fraud schemes. Officials say the suspects will face federal charges as the investigation continues. Vice President Vance praised the swift action, emphasizing that the administration's anti-fraud task force is now delivering results. He credited federal prosecutors and health officials for aggressively pursuing those who are exploiting these taxpayer-funded programs. The operation is part of a broader effort launched under President Trump, who appointed Vice President JD Vance to lead the fight against government waste and abuse. So far, authorities have suspended more than 200 hospice and healthcare providers in California alone due to suspected fraud. Numbers that officials say are expected to rise significantly in the coming weeks. Administration leaders argue that finding and exposing widespread abuse that went unchecked for years is just beginning. The director of the Center for Medicare and Medical Services, Dr. Mehmet Oz, noted that state leadership accomplished far less in recent years. The crackdown demonstrates a renewed commitment to accountability, protecting both taxpayers and the most vulnerable patients. As the investigation expands, officials say more arrests and suspensions are likely, sending a clear message that those who defrauded the system will be held responsible under the Trump administration's law and order approach. I'm Roger Stone. You're listening to The Stone Zone, and we'll be right back.
This is The Stone Zone with Roger Stone.
It is a great, great person, Roger Stone.
The Stone Zone. This is The Stone Zone. Now, get in the zone. It's The Stone Zone.
A man who's gone through hell, but he's kept going, and he's smart, and he's strong, and people love him. Not everybody, but people love him and respect him. Roger Stone. Where's Roger Stone?
Here's Roger Stone.
Welcome back into The Stone Zone. Once again, as we said at the top of the show, reports that President Donald Trump would either fire the Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, or that she would resign from her post are categorically false, and we await the confirmation of that with a formal statement from the White House later today. Once again, if you don't already know this, not everything you see on social media is correct, so trust but verify. Meanwhile, Texas Congressman Keith South is raising alarm over the presence of Sharia law adherent enclaves operating with the United States, pointing specifically to a community in Plano, Texas. Self says the development, centered around East Plano's Islamic Center, has existed for more than a decade and represents what he calls a parallel society that does not fully align with American legal and cultural norms. He argues the issue is not theoretical, but already unfolding in communities across the country. The congressman also highlighted when he described a troubling pattern of Islamic centers being built near law enforcement facilities, suggesting it is a form of intimidation and a way to undermine our constitutional system of law. Unchecked migration and policies that prioritize multiculturalism over integration are creating divided communities with competing systems of norms and authority. We see it in Texas. We see it in Dearborn, Michigan. We see it in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And soon, under the Mayor Mamdani, we will see it in New York City, if we don't see it already. And when they come in from the third world, they're not sending their best. They come here to defraud and feast upon the host country they are invading. The solution is clear. We must reaffirm the rule of law requiring full assimilation into American civil life and ensure that no parallel systems operate outside the Constitution. I'm Italian Americans. When Italians moved to America, they assimilated into America. They learned to speak English, they obeyed American law, and they were fully integrated into American society. Also true of the Irish, the Polish, the Hungarians, the Greeks, and every individual who was an immigrant who came to this country. What we see today is quite different. Congressman Self is leading the anti-Sharia law caucus in Congress. Sharia law is inconsistent with the Constitution of the United States and is inconsistent with our laws. Getting on the horn with your congressman or congresswoman and find out if they're in the caucus, and if so, ask them why not. Demand that they join. We do not want to become like Europe, which is today spiraling out of control under the yoke of radical Islam. Islam is simply incompatible with Western civilization. Meanwhile, a new study from Stanford University is raising serious concerns about the growing influence of artificial intelligence on everyday decision-making, especially among younger Americans. Researchers found that popular AI chatbots, including systems like ChatGPT and other leading platforms, tend to agree with users far more often than humans do, even when the user is clearly wrong. I decided to test this out yesterday, and I asked a very popular AI outlet whether Lee Harvey Oswald killed President John F. Kennedy. I then proceeded to argue with the computer for almost 45 minutes until I realized that it was fruitless and that they would never see the truth. AI, in my opinion, is extraordinarily dangerous. I've seen numerous videos of myself saying things that I never actually said. Sometimes they're so clumsy that the most basic AI detection software programs can show you that they are a fraud. Remember when there were phone calls made to every home in New Hampshire from President Joe Biden urging voters not to vote in that state's Democratic primary? I do. It was AI, showing why AI is extraordinarily dangerous. I think AI has many positive attributes, but I think there should be strict laws against impersonation and strict laws against fabricating the words and images of private individuals, putting words in their mouths that they never said. I'm Roger Stone. Thanks for joining us in the Stone Zone. Until tomorrow, God bless you and Godspeed.
Sacco and Felice, New York and New Jersey's premier attorneys at law. Their team brings decades of experience across a wide range of practice areas. Whatever life brings, they're your legal team. From everyday matters to complex cases, they've got you covered with the experience you need and the results you want. Because when life gets complicated, they make it simple. SaccoFelice.com. SACCOFILLAS.com. 2 C's, 2 L's.